welcome to episode 76. I am finally in my new office, but it is freezing and there's nothing on the wall, so it sounds a bit echoey because I'm essentially sitting in a big white empty box with just my desk and my massive cheese plant for company. Also, I've been too lazy to screw the feet into my fancy radiator, so it is cold. We're also having torrential rain to make up for our boiling hot summer. So if you can hear rain sounds, also it means that the cars driving past are making splashy noises. So I apologise for that. I will sort it out at some point. I'm not a technical person. It's a miracle I even got a microphone. So bear with me while I sort it out. Thanks to the patrons. Big shout out to everyone who is a patron, because that little pot of money is going towards me hopefully upping my recording equipment when I've become less terrified of making a decision about it. I also have a reading recommendation. I do so much true crime reading or reading for my work as a coach that I haven't really found a fiction book that I can get into. If I read true crime or coaching books before bed, I'm often too hyped up to work that I don't sleep very well. But I've been reading Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and I'm really getting into it, and I kind of just want everyone to stop annoying me so I can sit and finish it. So if you're looking for a fiction book, I really recommend it, and do send me in your reading recommendations for anything, because I love having a big book list. So today's episode is based on a film that I originally watched when I was about 15. It came out in 1975, before I was born. But I read it before Google existed. And now I was just thinking yesterday, my kids were watching Beauty and the Beast, and I was Googling who did all the voices for everything. I thought, my God, I first watched this movie before Google. So you couldn't Google. So I knew it was based on a true story, but I didn't know anything about it until suddenly I thought, oh, I'm going to read up about the background to that. And what a story it is. On the 22nd of August 1972, three men arrive at the Chase Manhattan Bank on 450 Avenue P in Gravesend, Brooklyn. The three men are John Wojtowicz. I want to apologise in advance for my terrible pronunciation of the names in this. Salvatore Naturale and Robert Westenberg. Now, Bob Westenberg sees a police car on the street and makes a run for it before they even start doing anything, and he leaves the other two to carry out their plan. So Wojtowicz himself is a former bank teller, and Naturale goes into the bank with him, and they plan to get the money, lock up the employees, and get the hell out. They really didn't want to cause any trouble. They were just wanting the money. And so they'd waited outside for the last customer to leave. But what would happen is they would go on to hold 7 bank employees hostage for 14 hours. It's one of the most ineffectual bank robberies of all time, and yet still one of the most famous. There's a film and at least 4 documentaries about what would become known as the Dog Day Afternoon bank robbery. So let's set the scene a little. In New York, in the early 1970s, homosexuality was considered a disease and gay rights barely existed. Crime rates were high. The subway system was considered unsafe. It was rife with crime and mechanical breakdowns, and Central Park was basically a no-go area after dark. There were constantly rapes and muggings taking place. And there were areas frequented by drug dealers and those experiencing homelessness with boarded up buildings, and the police were considered completely crooked. In 1971, New York police detective Frank Serpico revealed the extent of police corruption on the front page of the New York Times. So the night before the robbery, the 21st of August, my birthday, though I was yet to make an appearance in the world, Wojtowicz and his accomplices, 18-year-old Sal Naturale and 20-year-old Bobby Westenberg, stayed at a hotel in New Jersey and vaguely, turns out, planned for the next day. Wojtowicz had agreed to pay Westenberg $50,000 for his assistance. I don't know what Sal was doing. It would be about 28 degrees centigrade when they woke up the next day. So Nadarali and Wojtowicz had entered the bank with a plan to take a lot of money, lock the employees in the bank vault, and then walk out. They were going to give Bobby Westenberg $50,000, and the fact that they went just before closing meant that, in fact, there was only about $38,000 and $175,000 in travelers' checks. Wojtowicz would give some of the money to the hostages for the trouble he'd caused. They had to be persuaded by the police after the event to give it back. He was quite kind to the hostages. He ordered them pizza. But unluckily for the amateur bank robbers, a routine phone call from another branch of the Chase Bank meant that the manager who answered the call was able to use code to alert them that a robbery was going on. I don't know why. We'll talk about Wojtowicz being clever/thick later on, but I would be very wary about letting anyone answer the phone if I was robbing a bank. And he used to work as a teller, and I would have thought there would be training in place even in the 70s. So I'm surprised he wasn't more clued in on what was happening. So within half an hour, the bank is surrounded by throngs of police, FBI agents, reporters, and onlookers. And when Wojtowicz announces that he's doing it to get money for his wife's gender reassignment surgery, the crowd swells to over 2,000 people, many from the gay community who've come to support his cause. He becomes this sort of instant icon. Wotowicz's wife, Liz, is brought to the scene to try and persuade him to stop. There's talk of her being swapped with a hostage. I think she's kind of reluctant to even be involved in it. I think Wotowicz's mother is brought to chat to him, but I think he can basically do no wrong. She's the most devoted mother, so I'm not sure how effective she will have been. My mother would be absolutely furious. The 14-hour negotiations were continuously televised, and at 4 a.m. the next day, a limousine, as arranged, is pulled up outside the bank and takes Wojtowicz, Naturali, and the 7 hostages to Kennedy Airport, where Wojtowicz and Sal Naturali believe that they're going to get on a flight to Europe. They think they've done it. One of the hostages is assistant manager 48-year-old Dolores Gottesham, who is horrified by the ordeal. She really struggles with it afterwards. She's worked at the bank since she was 18 and would go on to work there till she retired. When in an interview she said she got the job, she never considered working anywhere else. Her concern during the robbery was for the younger girls working at the bank who seemed really scared and upset, and she considered herself a sort of maternal figure at work for these girls anyway. She buoyed them up. She was a devout Catholic herself, so she encouraged them to pray, and she would take it upon herself to join the bank robbers in escorting the girls to the loos when they needed to go. She was not about to have the robbers going into the bathroom with them. She said, "You're not coming in here," and basically blocked the door from them, which is fairly tough. She doesn't know that I don't think either man was ever going to use those guns, but she is having none of it. She is sitting next to Sal Naturali in the limousine when the driver, who's an undercover FBI agent, gets a message that the coast is clear, and he turns around and shoots Naturali on the way to the airport. The police, though solely dealing with Wojtowicz during the negotiation and at the bank, and you can see in the footage, Wojtowicz is loving it. He's coming out, he's talking to people, he's telling them to get back, he's negotiating, while Naturali stays inside with the gun. They consider Naturali as the more dangerous of the two. He has a criminal record. He had been picked up just 5 months before. He's been caught armed. So their focus is on neutralizing him. Dolores Gottschalk has to sit next to a man while he's shot. She is a single woman living alone. This is pretty tough for her, and she is picked up by a cousin from the airport at 6 a.m. She gets taken home to where she lives alone. She gets changed and she goes straight out to mass. She doesn't eat, she doesn't rest. She says, the first thing I figured when I got home was that I asked God for help. He gave it to me and I had to thank him. John Wojtowicz was born on the 9th of March 1945, the son of a Polish father and an Italian-American mother, Terry Basso. She would feature heavily in his life. She used to smuggle provolone in her bra into her precious pocket while he was in prison. And she says in an interview that she would follow him on his nights out into the village and spy on him. So basically, while he was getting it on with men in clubs, his mother was lurking and spying on him, which I find fairly creepy. He has two brothers, one of whom is never mentioned. The other, Tony, has developmental disabilities which keep him at home, but he seems to have quite a good relationship with him. While working at a bank as a bank teller in the early 1960s, Wojtowicz meets Carmen Bifulco on a work ski trip, and they get engaged quickly, but before they can marry, he gets drafted to Vietnam. It's at base camp that he has his first homosexual encounter, which seems to really light a fire in Wojtowicz. It kickstarts his libido. Carmen is a very good Italian-American wife. She sticks by him and she doesn't really talk, so we don't know what their sex life has been like, but this experience really lights a fire in Wojtowicz, and he suffers a lot of the trauma experienced by many who served in Vietnam, but particularly being one of the few survivors of a rocket attack at his base camp. When he gets back to New York in 1967, he marries Carmen and they have 2 children. On the 20th of July 1969, the same day that a man walks on the moon, Wojtowicz and Carmen and their 8-month-old daughter are at a baseball game. He leaves early, and by the time Carmen and their daughter get home, the apartment is completely empty, right down to the 8-month-old cot and pram. He's left Carmen a $10 bill to get a cab to her parents' house. What an arsehole. For Wojtowicz, this is like freedom. He joins the Gay Activist Alliance, driven more by the desire for sex than by an interest in activism or politics, and he becomes a regular on the gay scene, going by the name Little John Basso. As a member of the so-called entertainment committee, he would be in charge of welcoming people into the community, which in his own words, this enabled him to have sex with them quicker than anybody else because they were just coming out. Throughout everything I've seen and read, there's something very narcissistic and predatory about John Wojtowicz, which leaves me feeling deeply uncomfortable. I feel like he uses sex as a way to control people and dominate and be the center of attention. Opinions of him at the Gay Activist Alliance is divided. He would have sex publicly at parties. He had links to the mafia and wasn't considered someone doing something great for the community. Randy Wicker said he was seen as a Looney Tune. Arthur Bell describes him as pleasant, spunky, a little crazy, and upfront about his high sex drive, while Wicker said many on the scene regarded him as a crazy, obnoxious, unlikable bisexual. But Wojtowicz wasn't harmless, I don't think. He met Mike Umbers, who had connections with the Gambino crime family and ran a prostitution ring pimping underage boys to wealthy paedophiles. Wojtowicz became their informant for what was going on with the GAA, the Gay Activist Alliance, and would often send men over to Umber's popular club, Christopher's End. So what I can gather is while Wojtowicz was out at the clubs at night in the village, if he saw someone suitable for Umber's, whether it was someone who was underage or a rich guy who might be into underage kids. He would say, this place is dead. It's all happening at Christopher's End. You should go over there. Not pleasant. In 1971, he met Ernie Aaron, a transgender woman from Ozone Park, Queens, who went by the name Liz Eden. I think it tells you all you need to know that Wojtowicz rarely calls Liz by her name, referring to her as Arnie, and more often than not misgendering her. That December, much to the horror of Eden's friends, the pair were married in a non-binding ceremony at Liz's apartment. The wedding drew a lot of attention, featured on the Walter Cronkite CBS Evening Television News, and is considered by many the first official gay marriage in New York. Though it wasn't obviously legal in terms of the documentation, it was performed by a Catholic priest. So for many, that's all you need. The bridesmaids were gay men, the lesbians wore tuxedos, and it took place in a bar opposite a police station. So though it was considered a stand for the rights of people to be able to marry whoever they want, I think Wojtowicz, who referred to Liz as Ernest and he throughout, loved being the centre of attention. He didn't just do this because he loved Liz and wanted to marry her. It was, let's do this in public, let's have as much attention as possible. By April the next year, they were living separately, but Eden was desperate for gender reassignment surgery, something which Wojtowicz was initially against, and neither of them could afford. He was also in debt to Unbers, possibly for the $2,000 cost of the wedding, and he needed to find a way to pay it back. After Eden attempted to take her life, Wojtowicz vowed to make the money for the surgery because he realised it would save her life. She was desperately unhappy. I wanted this reassignment surgery, and he wanted to make it happen for her. He's such a strange man. He's thoughtless. He leaves his family in such a bastard way, but then he's deeply caring and will go to whatever length to get Liz the surgery she needs. He is clever in some ways, but also incredibly stupid. And it's now that he hatches the plan to get the money that he needs by robbing a bank. He would say that this plan was to pay for Eden's surgery, but many believed it was also to pay back the debt he owed to Unbers. You do not want to be in debt to the mafia. So he goes to find people to help, and he finds 5 people initially, but lots drop out, and he is left with 18-year-old Sal Naturale, who'd been in and out of institutions since he was 11, and 20-year-old Westenberg, who turns out he just wanted to, in his own words, fuck. Weird choice of an accomplice. He basically rather proudly says in a documentary how he wanted to fuck Bobby Westenberg, so he said he'd give him $50,000 from the bank robbery, and for $50,000 he should also be allowed to fuck him. And it's just the way he says it, he's so pleased with himself, and it's so sort of controlling and threatening. It really makes me feel uncomfortable. After the event, Wojtowicz basically made it sound like he had more of a plan than he actually did. He afterwards would also kind of imply that he was a really good bank robber and it went really well. But there was no real plan, and it's a miracle they got as far as they did. So after watching The Godfather in a Times Square cinema to gear themselves up, they go off in search of a bank. One version of the story has it that the Chase bank they robbed was expecting $2,000 in cash, and that Unbers had given them the guns in exchange for a 50% cut of the taking. However, this is the most half-cocked bank robbery ever, and them going to 3 banks before settling on the 4th doesn't make sense. If they had known about the amount of money, then why are they going to other banks first? At the first bank they decide to try, a gun is dropped and goes off, so they flee. At the second they run into one of their mother's best friends, so they can't go through with that. And at the third, they crash into another car when they pull up outside, and so they abandon that one as well. And so fourth time lucky, though not for the bank workers who have a horrible 14 hours ahead of them. So afterwards, with naturally dead, Wojtowicz is the guy who faces prison, and he gets sentenced to 20 years, of which he would only serve 5. And while he's there, he gets approached by Warner Brothers, who have read an article in Life magazine and want to turn it into a movie that would end up being Dog Day Afternoon, starring none other than the Godfather's Al Pacino. Wojtowicz initially says no, but then he agrees to sell the story for $7,500 and 1% of net profits so he could pay for Eden's surgery. But he doesn't realise that in prison it's not as easy as all that, so he has to sue from prison to get the money, with Liz eventually getting $2,500 for her operation. And the lawyer he uses from prison ends up being Wotowitz's third wife, George. Carmen and Wojtowicz are still legally married, and she visits him in prison, though she would sometimes bump into Liz Eden, and they were initially understandably frosty. They formed a sort of friendship, with Carmen calling Liz after each of her operations. I would love more information on Carmen. I can't decide if she's a bit not very clever, or if she's very, she's living her promise, her vows. She's a kind woman who can empathise and is living the hand that she was dealt. I would love more info on Carmen. After completion surgery, Liz visits John one last time in prison to say that her surgeon, as was typical of the time, has told her that she should no longer have any contact with John. She should move to a new city and basically start her life as a woman completely over. And Wojtowicz is devastated, and that evening attempts suicide in prison. Dog Day Afternoon is released in 1975 and is a huge success, nominated for 6 Academy Awards, 7 Golden Globes, and winning the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. It's fairly accurate, though it's filmed in the autumn rather than the hot New York summer, so the actors have to chew ice cubes so that their breath doesn't show on the film. I love little snippets like that. It unfairly portrays Wotowitz's relationship with his wife Carmen, and he's very vocal about this afterwards. She's portrayed as this sort of fat, plain woman, and he says, she's my female wife. I love bigger women, and the film sort of implies that she was wanting in some way, and so drove him to his relationship with drag queens who are much more glamorous. But this is completely wrong, and he hates that implication. Liz Eden is played by Chris Sarandon and is presented as a mid-70s stereotype, which again isn't quite what happened. But the film doesn't flinch from portraying Wotowitz's lifestyle in the grittier side of New York, and they get that really well. Pacino takes a massive professional gamble on being the first film star to portray a gay man, and a sympathetic one at that. In fact, the portrayal of Wojtowicz and Eden's relationship avoids all the gay stereotypes usually seen in films at that time, and it expertly deals with the social, sexual, and emotional complexities of New York. However, as much as Wojtowicz sang its praises, he maintained it was only 30% true, citing many little things, including the fact that the Pacino character never talks to his mother in the film. Wojtowicz speaks to his mother a lot. She was present through all important parts of his life, spying on him at his escapades in the village nightlife, and she was present at his marriage to Liz Eden. And rather than the rather desperate, chaotic, likeable Sonny Warzik, played by Pacino, Wojtowicz is a narcissistic, self-described pervert who loved attention and would do anything to get it. In the 2013 documentary The Dog, Wojtowicz says, "There was only one star, and that was me." He is also sex obsessed and indiscriminate about who he sleeps with. It's almost as if sex is part of his identity. He says in the documentary that most people either drink, smoke, or take drugs, and for him, he has sex. When he leaves prison on the 10th of April 1978, after 5 years, Wojtowicz would go back to prison 2 more times for parole violations in 1984 and 1986, and he would then apply for a job as a security guard at the bank he had been in prison for robbing, saying no one would dare rob the dog's bank, even though he was quite an ineffectual bank robber, and it's part of his portrayal as he has this public persona. When he surprisingly doesn't get the job, he stands outside wearing a t-shirt saying, "I robbed this bank," signing autographs. Wojtowicz would say that Eden, who had remarried, would visit him in New York about once a month, though we don't know if this is true. Eden died of AIDS-related pneumonia at Genesee Hospital in Rochester, New York on the 29th of April 1987. Wojtowicz attended her funeral and delivered her eulogy. Salvatore Naturale often gets overlooked in this story. He was known to the police as Donald Matteson and had been arrested under that name for possession of narcotics and burglary tools just 5 months before the bank robbery and his death. His intention was to use the proceeds to finance his 2 sisters' removal from foster care and removal from their alcoholic mother, which I find sad. A bartender friend of Sal asked the Gay Activist Alliance to help fund the burial, which they refused, and Sal was interred in the gigantic Pauper burial site on Hart Island off the Bronx coast, which contains 1 million corpses. In 1973, after the robbery and before the release of Dog Day Afternoon, the American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder. Opinions amongst the gay rights movement at the time are divided in their opinion on Wojtowicz. Randy Wicker, a journalist and early gay rights advocate, said in one interview, "I don't think it changes the impression of the gay rights movement because, first of all, this guy is a bisexual polygamist. I think it will be viewed as an isolated, bizarre story." The jury is out on John Wojtowicz. He seems to have been enabling an underground paedophile ring. He traumatized bank workers, seemed to treat his wife and children terribly, and in a number of stories I read, basically insisted on people having sex with him. He was unashamedly himself in a time when homosexuality was considered a disease. He said, "When I love someone, I want to marry them." He'd walk down the street holding hands with whomever he chose. He didn't care for what people thought, especially considering he's from Italian Brooklyn family. In the 1970s, this is quite an incredible way to live. John Wojtowicz ended his life a fairly sad character. His mugshot, he looks quite handsome in a sort of Dustin Hoffman way, and he becomes this sort of fat, sex-obsessed man. He lives on welfare in Brooklyn. He does some work as janitor and a cleaner until he can't work anymore. And for the last years of his life, he's on welfare, cared for by his brother Tony, and he dies of cancer aged 60 on the 2nd of January 2006 at his mother's house. And that is the story of John Wojtowicz and the Dog Day Afternoon bank robbery. I hope you enjoyed this story. A bit lighter. We're going back on the London Tube next week, so gird your loins for some grisly true crime. I hope you're all cozied up and enjoying the autumn weather that's definitely descended here, and send me a message, themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. You can come and find us on Instagram, TikTok and Facebook at The Monday Night Review. Do come and sign up to be a Patreon where you get mini-sodes, you get some extra early episodes if I'm doing a multiple-parter, and you get little stories every week, and you get my undying love and devotion, and you get to support the podcast, which means hopefully it will just keep getting better and better. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seats before you drive. Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod, and this is the Monday Night Review.